This is Building Resilience Podcast, episode 180, Catastrophizing. Welcome to Building Resilience, a podcast where theory, practical strategies, and inspiring stories show you how to unlock your best life. I'm your host, Leah Davidson. As a certified life coach, speech-language pathologist, and nervous system resilience expert, it is my mission to teach you how to be more resilient to life's adversities. I will show you how to manage your mind, befriend your nervous system, process your emotions, and even eliminate stress. It's time to do more than just survive. It's time to thrive. Let's get started. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Building Resilience Podcast. I hope you are having an amazing week. I have a quick favor to ask of you. If you enjoy listening to this podcast, would you please share it with somebody that you know who would also benefit from it? And I would also love it if you could leave a review. Leaving reviews is how other people are going to be able to find this podcast. So I would really appreciate that if you are so inclined. So today we're talking about catastrophizing. There was a running joke in our family. We actually have three last names. There's my husband's name. There's my name. It's my maiden name. I've never changed my name when I've been married. And just for interest's sake, I first was married in Quebec. And in Quebec, you're actually not allowed to change your name unless you pay to change your name. So I had never changed my name at all. So I have one last name, and then my boys have their dad's last name. So our three last names, when we got married, blended our family, we became known as the CDF family, standing for all three letters of our last names. And so I developed an acronym with those letters. The C in our name, it actually stands for charity. But I used to joke and say it stands for catastrophizing because we seem to have a whole family of people who catastrophize. Everyone in my family has their own way of catastrophizing. I don't think it's too unusual. I think it's a common mind trap or a common cognitive distortion, as it's often called. Now, some of my family members catastrophize about health. So don't get a rash or a bug bite around some people in my family. And others are catastrophizing about school and about failing classes and getting bad grades. And then in future, never being able to find a job. And then others will encounter bad weather and assume that we're all going to die because of it. So I can poke fun now about it. We can all laugh about it, but the mind still goes there. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So essentially, catastrophizing is a thinking trap. It's a cognitive distortion. And you can go to Wiki, where we can read that a cognitive distortion is an exaggerated or irrational thought pattern. And they are thoughts that cause individuals to perceive reality inaccurately. And then there's a negative outlook or a negative thinking pattern that reinforces this negative emotion and these negative thoughts. And so all these distorted thoughts contribute to an overall negative outlook on the world and a depressive or anxious mental state. So I often refer to it, instead of a cognitive distortion, I refer to it as a thinking trap. And a thinking trap is basically a thought error that our brain will turn to. So they are patterned ways of thinking, almost like the go-to response that our brain will give. And we all have them, that nothing's gone wrong if you have a thinking trap. We're normal humans who have a brain that likes to be efficient and to rely on familiar ways of thinking. So the brain creates a pathway, although it doesn't always know if the pathway is a good one or a bad one. But we've learned that the nervous system, it is highly sensitive, but it's not always highly accurate. We create pathways of what gets repeated and what gets learned. That's just neuroplasticity. But some paths and some thought patterns are not the most helpful. So it's good to be aware of what these traps are. If we can identify them, then we can try to change them, and this will lead to greater resilience. So catastrophizing is a very common thinking trap, and you can identify it as something like falling down a rabbit hole or spiraling out of control or going to doomsday or a snowball effect. It's simply taking a thought and getting on a runaway train with it. That will eventually, you assume, crash. And it can start with something simple as, my child is having a hard time with grade 1 science, and end up all the way to they will end up homeless and unemployed because they won't be able to get a job because they failed out of school. Now, I may or may not have done that once or twice. Now, you may start with one negative thought, and it basically will lead to a disastrous outcome. So if we end up going to the worst case possible scenario, we magnify, we amplify the potential negative outcomes of a situation while we minimize the likelihood of the positive outcomes. So everything is a disaster, and the assumption is, I'm never going to be able to handle this. So catastrophizing usually revolves around beliefs projecting into the future. These events haven't happened, and there's really no reason to determine that the scenario that we fear is the most likely one to happen. We certainly can't project so far into the future, and at any moment things can change. But we actually convince ourselves, and we start imagining and envisioning the worst outcome. So have you ever allowed your brain to get on that runaway train? I know I totally have. And just recently, one of my sons left a couple weeks ago to go tree planting up in northern Alberta. And usually when he travels, he's pretty good at letting me know where he is and giving me some updates along the way. But this time I didn't hear from him. Now, at first I thought nothing of it, but then I had this tiny little thought creep in that something was wrong. Now, what was interesting is that I am onto my brain. I know it can catastrophize very easily. So I watched it initially. I stayed calm. I did a strategy that I have taught many times to my clients: worst case, best case, and most likely case. So the worst case scenario, I actually did allow my brain to go there because I was calm. I know how to access my safety cue, as I call it. This is something that I teach all my clients. We're working on it in my Connections membership. So I knew that if I started to get really panicked thinking of my worst case scenario, I could find my way back home and I can get back to calm and safe. So I went to it. Something happened to him. He was kidnapped. He was hurt. He was lying unconscious somewhere. I allowed myself to entertain those ideas, make peace with the worst case scenario, so to speak. And then I went to the best case scenario. And well, in this case, the best case scenario is he was totally safe and his phone died or he had no connection. After the best case scenario, you want to explore the most likely case. And in this case, the most likely case was probably the same as the best case. Now, I will admit, I am a mom. And so when I started to catastrophize, even knowing that I was just entertaining the worst case scenario, my brain started firing up a little bit faster. I ended up reaching out to my other son to see if he had heard from his brother. Then I reached out to the mom of his friend who was also with him and asked her to check in with her son to see if he was okay. So I did have a little spiral, but I was able to remain a little bit more calm. And at midnight, I got a text from him. His phone had died. He just needed to charge it. But you can see when we catastrophize, we start going into team hyper. Like I knew that. I felt my energy rise. I acted on it a little bit. And then I tried to remind myself I'm safe, bring back my energy, relaxing my body, breathing, using my safety cue to bring me back home. But in general, when we catastrophize, our stress response does get activated. That sympathetic energy gets triggered and it will release stress hormones like cortisol. And our heart rate will increase. We have shallow breathing. We have heightened arousal. And of course, we do lose main access to our CEO. So we do have a hard time being rational about things. And then being in a constant state of team hyper can have lots of implications on us: physical, mental, emotional. It can lead to heightened anxiety, chronic anxiety. This tendency to catastrophize can be the result and or the cause of anxiety. And it's also linked to depression. And chronic stress in general leads to elevated blood pressure, compromised immune function, and really an overall increase of cardiovascular disease and other disease as well. And they've even found correlations between catastrophizing and somatic symptoms like headaches and muscle tension and gastrointestinal issues. So catastrophizing can lead to a lot of health issues. It can also lead to self-perpetuating cycle of negative thinking and avoidance behaviors, which really reinforce the belief in these catastrophic outcomes. Now, before you panic and catastrophize that you catastrophize, we will all catastrophize to some degree. But we want to get good at catching ourselves. So if you notice in my story, I knew I had a tendency to catastrophize. I could feel myself. I allowed myself to have it. And then I reined myself back in. Now, even when I was just allowing myself to have it, I did take some actions, but I was still pretty rational and I reined myself back in. One of the things we want to do is we want to get good at catching ourselves and reminding ourselves, this is just a thought that I'm having. It's completely optional what I do with this thought. All right, so now you have an understanding of what it is and how we're all doomed because we do it. Let's look at what we can actually do about it. So a key to breaking catastrophic thinking is to break out of the chain of the future threat beliefs. And the best way to do that is to really sit down and figure out what is actually fact and what is in the present. So this is where it comes in handy, this idea of dividing things up between fact versus story. Now, facts are the non-negotiables, the what we know already, can be proven in a court of law, that kind of thing. Everyone agrees we have proof, it's the math, and it is something that is the data point. So it can be helpful for us to really sit down and write out, not just think about it, to write out all the facts in objective terms. And be careful of that sneaky brain, because it can really try to skew the facts, which is why I like asking myself, what is true in this situation? And then I also like to ask myself, and what else is also true? To really push my brain to acknowledge the whole truth. Remember, our brain has a negativity bias. It will go down the spiral. So we need to also have some equal airtime to the positive things that we need. So when the train starts running away, stopping and asking, what are the facts? Then what else is true? This can bring me back to the present, and that can help me choose a different route to go. And then I can look at what my story is. So when I start identifying my story, it is helpful again to write it out. And as you're writing it out, reminding yourself that it is all a story. These are just thoughts. Writing down all these thoughts allows us to start exploring what some of the other options are, or what is often called cognitive reframing or cognitive restructuring. So some examples could be, and we already kind of did this one strategy, asking, is this thought true? Is it completely true? Is there more to it? What is the whole truth? You want to be seeking evidence for and against and writing down that evidence for your story. Secondly, asking yourself, is this story helpful or harmful? Now, it is important to get regulated to more of a calm place so we can have our CEO involved and have her help us answer whether the story is helpful or harmful. Once we are regulated and in our home base, then we can start playing with thoughts. Thoughts are optional. We get to choose what thoughts will serve us. Choosing one thought versus another, because everything really is a story. So we get to choose what thought. This is why I find it helpful to do the worst case, best case, and most likely case, because it helps you see everything is a story. Now, a third way to play around with the thoughts is from the perspective of the nervous system. If you go back to episode 121 called The 3 Stories That We Tell, you will see an example of this. The state of your nervous system flavors every story that you have. But what you can do is you can anticipate what your story would be if you were in a different state. So what would your story look like if you were on Team Hyper? Well, it would likely be flavored with energy, maybe anger, hypervigilance, anxiety. If you were on Team Hypo, it would be flavored with helpless and hopeless, maybe more of a victim stance. But then if you were on Team Resilient, this is where we are connected and level-headed and resilient and calm and joyful. So how could you reframe if you were in a different zone is one way to play around with our story. A fourth way that you can help conquer catastrophic thinking is to think back to past challenges and just remind yourself of what happened with them. How have you overcome challenges in the past? And what did you do to help yourself? What resources did you access? And I do like to counter the what ifs with the even ifs. Instead of what if this happens, switch to even if this happens. And then you'll see how capable you are and how you have often dealt with lots of adversity previously. The fifth thing is you want to get in the present moment. Bring yourself back. This train is runaway. You need to get it in and bring it back to the station. Things that will help are breathing or body scan exercises, all the things that will help bring you back to the present moment. So even meditation can help, simply observing your thoughts and your emotions without judgment or attachment or any type of meditative activity. The sixth thing we can do is practice self-compassion. Instead of berating yourself for maybe something you did or a mistake you made or catastrophizing about something happening, try practicing self-compassion. For example, offering yourself words of kindness and understanding. You can validate your own feelings and you can normalize them as well. The seventh thing you can do is just ask someone to help. Reach out for a different perspective. Share your concerns. Share with them, this is what I'm thinking. Share these catastrophic thoughts. And then listen to their feedback. And if they have alternative viewpoints on the situation, perhaps consider how their perspective can help you reframe your thoughts and help you develop a more balanced perspective. And then lastly, cultivating gratitude for the positive aspects of your life and focusing on what you can control in the present moment can be really helpful, because catastrophizing is all about the predictions you make about the future. So focus on the present, bring yourself back to the present, express gratitude for the present. So that is what I have for you today. I really encourage you to take time to recognize if you have any patterns of catastrophizing, and then to experiment with some of the techniques and the strategies that we talked about to really cultivate a more balanced and resilient mindset. Have a great week, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to the Building Resilience podcast. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about managing stress, building resilience, and leading a more purposeful life, then make sure we're connected on Instagram and Facebook at Leah Davidson Life Coaching. You can also subscribe to my weekly newsletter at www.leahdavidsonlifecoaching.com/newsletter. Looking forward to connecting.